this is Rick. I was watching Benjamin Cook's Becoming YouTube recently, an episode of that. It was the episode about what YouTube isn't. And it got me thinking, because there was references made in there as to the difference between television and YouTube, and whether YouTube is becoming the new television, or whether it even wants to become the new television. And it kind of got me thinking, because I've been in the business of television production for over 20 years, and I remember in the old days to work a TV camera was a skill that you had to learn. There were the only sort of domestic cameras that people had were little Super 8 film cameras. So to work what was then a video camera, a TV camera, was a skill that you had to learn. They were huge, big things, enormous, not like the little handy cams you get now, and very, very heavy to hold. Everything was manually controlled, so you needed to understand about focus and aperture and white balancing and all things that people nowadays all understand. But in those days, nobody knew what you were talking about if you talked about daylight being 5600 Kelvin or whatever. It was a skill, and if you had the skill and you trained and become a TV cameraman, you could be employed, and you had to in those days be part of a union to be employed on TV. It was all very sort of closed shop, and not just closed shop, but you had to learn how to do it, and therefore you could make a good living at it, because it was a particular skill that you trained for, and dedicated your career to being a TV cameraman. And I also trained how to be a TV editor, which was also a skill. These days edit suites are within computers, desktop computers or laptops. In those days an edit suite was an entire room with various machinery all connected together with cables, and a huge big kind of manually operated controller that was in itself the size of a computer. We filmed on 1-inch tape that came in cartridges that was huge, that were separated from the camera, or later on when they were incorporated into the camera, it made the camera incredibly heavy, particularly if you're doing handheld work. It sounds ridiculous, and I guess it is when you look at the way things are today. So I carried on my career in TV, oblivious that the industry was changing as technology became faster, smaller, more compact and more easier to use. People were more aware of digital technology and how to use it, because they could go to the local Dixon's or wherever and buy a camcorder and become cameramen and producers with no training whatsoever, other than the training that they had had by watching television themselves and film themselves. And so I was bumbling along, getting freelance work as a TV cameraman and a TV editor. My work was getting less and less as universities then started offering film courses and media study courses that resulted in graduates coming out of uni understanding about television techniques and production. And I had a son called Alex Day who taught me a lot as he grew older about the world of YouTube and internet technology and internet production. And I realised that there was a whole other world that was going on parallel to the mainstream. Does television have something to fear from YouTube? Yes, because it's a different world now, it's a different medium, and television is an old dinosaur and acts like one. It doesn't understand what's happening with the internet and with the world of YouTube and the world of people making their own programs sitting at home. It doesn't understand that it can be a self-funding occupation. Television is used to a hierarchy of people who commission programs and have a budget, normally a big budget, and that there needs to be lots of production people, camera people, runners, researchers, producers, directors, makeup people, a whole gamut of people who are going to be involved in a production and who are each creaming off a little bit of money from the production. YouTube works very differently. It works on a very small scale, normally one person's brainwave, one person's idea. He then takes his camcorder and films it and puts it, edits it himself on his computer, puts it up on YouTube for nothing. There is no budget there unless he wishes to employ people to make his production look a bit better. Often though, he might just get his friends involved for nothing. And so the mainstream TV industry will scoff at that and think, well, you know, that's not going to be good productions, is it? How are they going to make any money? Well, technology has increased very quickly to the level that camcorders now are as good as broadcast cameras. And indeed the BBC and the main channels use what they call stringers, people in different areas who will own a camera and go out at short notice to film some news item. Those of you familiar with digital cameras will know what I'm talking about when I tell you that Sony Z1s were used. They're very out of date now, but they were used and they were broadcast. And the old dinosaurs would say, well, how are, you know, the YouTubers or the internet filmmakers going to make any money out of this if they've got no budget and they're doing it for nothing and they're uploading it for free? Well, I have news for them. I've learnt from my son that there is money to be made, but it's not the way that the old guard made their money. It's not a strategy where you have marketing people and sales people and they go about making a plan. It's not like that. People are just doing stuff because they want to do it because they think it's fun and funky. And there's an audience for fun and funky. And the YouTube audience and the internet audience are very savvy. And they're not going to get hoodwinked into falling for some crap just because an advertiser is going to tell them it's going to be a good program. They're going to believe that. They believe what they want to believe and they like what they like. And the programming on the internet that they like becomes successful because of click-through advertising, and the video uploaders make money off of that. How can that be? You know, the old guard don't understand that. Mainstream traditional TV people don't understand that, but they're desperate to understand it, and so they try and tap into it and they try and watch what the kids are doing on the internet to try and sort of suss out how it works and how they can get a piece of it. But it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work by trying to work out how to get a piece of it. It works almost by osmosis. I used to work once for a guy called Richard Desmond. He has taken over Channel 5 and runs Channel 5 now. And obviously that's run like, I almost said proper, it's wrong, isn't it? It's run like a traditional TV channel with studios, employees and salespeople and marketing plans and tapping into popular cultural shows like Big Brother that are going to have mainstream commercial interest and interest that's going to carry through into newspapers and magazines, so that's going to give you advertising for your channel and exposure to people to watch your channel, and therefore that's going to attract advertisers as well in the commercial breaks. It works like that. I also recently worked for a new channel that was on channel 200 called Loaded TV. It was based around the popular mid-shelf men's magazine Loaded. It was interesting because, like Channel 5 was owned by one guy who's a millionaire and he can fund it, albeit in the guise of his company, Loaded TV was also run by one guy, a multi-millionaire, who could fund it himself, whether it kind of succeeded or not. What was interesting though was, although it kind of aped a traditional television mainstream channel in that we had studios and crew, people that were on the payroll, full-time editors and makeup people and researchers and so on, it also worked a bit more anarchically in that the brainstorms and the ideas of the man who owned and funded the channel were what went. He didn't have a board of directors to answer to, he didn't have a load of advertisers and people that he needed to sort of reach a certain criteria. He could fund it himself, so therefore he could do what he wanted. And I found that quite interesting because his brain works in a fantastic way, which is often like he's dancing with creative pixies, and he comes up with some surreal and bizarre and kind of marvellous ideas. A lot of them don't work, a lot of them do. But the point is, he can do them because he can afford to do them. And for a traditional mainstream TV channel, that was quite unique. I don't think there'd ever been something like that before. So we'd have board meetings with crew and the producers and so on, and he'd override anybody's objections that things couldn't be done by saying, well, yes, they can be done. He didn't understand about really how television worked, but he knew what he wanted, and he said, well, look, you know, if we put a camera up in the corner of the room, light it and film it, we've got a program. And he's kind of right. So a lot of the old sort of guard who was saying, well, no, you can't do that, you need a studio and you need, you know, researchers and you need a big budget and you've got to hire cameras and, you know, if you're going to do something live you need an OB van, and, you know, they were all just kind of brushed aside, and he went ahead and did it his way anyway. It was fun, it was funky, it was like punk. Like the punk groups couldn't play their instruments, but that wasn't the point. They were doing something fresh and interesting. The joy of working for him was that he was doing something really fresh and interesting, and he had a different approach. He had an internet approach almost to traditional television. He was more like an internet kid in his bedroom coming up with an idea and then the next day getting it filmed and putting it straight up onto his channel. That's kind of more like the YouTube way. So what about the new kid on the block, YouTube, or even the idea of digital television? Well, as we all know, there's set-top boxes now, so you can watch the internet on your TV. The worlds are meshing and colliding in such a way now that, whereas in the old days you used to sit down and you'd watch what was on because that was the only choice you had, and you didn't even have an iPlayer or a choice of re-watching it unless you were fortunate enough in those days to own a video recorder, because they were expensive originally. You had to kind of watch what was on, and that was the water cooler moment the next day when everyone had watched it and talked about it the next day. These days it's very different. My son Alex doesn't watch TV in a traditional way. He watches it online, anything he wants to watch. Same with Carrie, and same with me. I have a TV, but my girlfriend really watches it in a traditional way. I tend to watch programs that I want to see when I choose to watch them on iPlayer. So the world is changing, and even though you can now get the internet on TV, which seems to me a strange kind of way around, because it seems more sensible to me to get traditional TV on the internet, because that's where people are watching things, on their phones, on their iPads, you know, on their laptops. That seems more to me the way things are going to go. So is it going to be that in the future the box that we all used to sit around in the old days when I was a kid won't be there anymore? There'll be a space there. There won't be any TV maybe, but we'll be watching stuff on our laptops, on our iPhones, on our wristwatches, whatever the way technology is going to go. How does that work for the producers and the filmmakers and the people that are trying to make productions? Well, I've been in the business, as I say, for over 20 years, and I'm now finding it very difficult to get work in the traditional way, because there are now also so many channels because of Sky and so on. There are a lot of cable and satellite channels. There are therefore a lot of people working now in the industry. There used to be only the BBC and, you know, the main ones, and now of course there's loads of small, low-budget TV channels who all need cameramen and people. But they're choosing, obviously, to pay a low wage, and they're getting people out of uni who are happy to work for a low wage initially, and they're using them. So the competition to get work is fiercer, the wages are lower, and young companies are more likely to go with young kids and not old geezers like myself. So work is tough, but because of Alex and because of the way I can see the future, I think it's going to be very interesting what's going to happen to television within the next decade or so. And I hope very much that I can be a part of new media as I have been for old media. Thanks for listening.